Hello, and welcome to the Foundation of Faith series, The Bridge Builder's Code, Volume 1, by Jenny Jo Bingham. Tonight, we will be reading Chapter 9, The Bridge and the Breakthrough. The worksite sat quiet beneath the dusk, golden light stretching across unfinished beams like a benediction. It had been nearly a week since the permit notice, and no one had lifted a hammer since. But tonight, they weren't gathering to build, they were gathering to listen. Jake stood near the fire pit they dug beside the river, smoothing the pages of his father's journal with calloused hands. Around him, camp chairs scraped against gravel. Someone had brought a guitar, though no one had picked it up yet. A cooler of water bottles sat untouched near the table of cinnamon rolls Miss Dunn insisted on bringing, just in case prayer made folks hungry. Grace had organized the details. Of course she had. She was good at that. Quietly making things come together while pretending she wasn't the one holding the strings. Jake had just asked for prayer, and somehow they'd all come. He took a breath, heart thudding against the weight of the moment. This wasn't about construction anymore. Not really. This was foundation work of a different kind. The kind that didn't show up on blueprints, but still held everything together. Walt leaned on his cane, and Jenny stood with Micah off to the side, arms crossed, but present. The Reyes teen sat cross-legged on a log, whispering nervously, and Grace sat close, arms around her knees, face turned toward the river as if listening for something deeper than a current. Even Marcus had shown up, sitting apart from the others, but facing the circle, his body language unreadable. And Evan, faithful, sarcastic Evan, was leaning on a log, sipping from a dented mug like this was the most normal thing in the world. Jake cleared his throat. "I don't have a sermon," he said, "and I'm not a pastor. I'm a guy who ran from a lot of things and is trying not to anymore." He looked around the circle. "I asked you to come tonight because I realized this bridge was never meant to be just wood and bolts. It was supposed to connect more than land. It was supposed to connect people, stories, maybe even faith." He opened the journal. "My dad once wrote, 'Faith doesn't erase resistance. It just gives you reason to push through it. Some bridges are built through prayer before they're built through planning.' T.W." He closed the book. "So that's what we're doing tonight. Praying, even if it's awkward, even if we're not sure how." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was full, like the air was waiting for something sacred. Jake wasn't sure who would speak next. Then Grace stood, slow and deliberate. She walked to the fire and looked down at the flames for a long moment before speaking. "When I was young, my mom died in a car accident." A few heads lifted. "I was angry at God, at the world, at anyone who told me everything happens for a reason. I packed a bag 3 weeks later and nearly left town. I didn't want to stay in the place that held my pain." She paused, voice steady but raw. "But a woman at church found me at the bus station. She sat next to me, held my hand, and said, 'Don't let your grief convince you you've got no place here.'" Grace looked up. "So I stayed. I joined the library board. I helped reopen the teen center. I started believing that staying isn't giving up. It's giving in to the kind of healing that can only happen where you were broken." She turned toward Jake. "That's why this bridge matters. Because healing doesn't happen in isolation. It happens when we choose to rebuild where it hurt." Jake swallowed hard. His throat ached with something deeper than emotion, recognition. One by one, others shared. Small things, simple things. Miss Dunn read a psalm. Her voice wavered a little, but the words landed like balm. "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted." Elena asked if she could write a verse on one of the beams later. Jake nodded. Walt prayed a quiet, stuttering prayer that ended with, "Sorry, Lord, I'm rusty, but I'm here." Marcus didn't add a word of his own, but he didn't walk away either, and maybe that said more than anything he could have spoken. Afterward, Jake stayed behind to clean up. Grace lingered, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "That was more than I expected," she said. Jake looked up. "Same." They stood in silence for a while, watching the last flickers of firelight dance across the ground. Grace leaned into the stillness, her tone soft. "You're not just building a bridge, Jake. You're learning to carry people across it." Jake looked at her, a question in his eyes, but she shook her head gently. "Not tonight," she said. "Just keep showing up." He nodded. "I will." Jake's voice dropped, steady but urgent. "I'm not going anywhere. Not this time." And for some reason, he really needed her to believe that. Grace wanted to trust the weight in his words, but doubt pressed at the edges of her heart, whispering that promises had a way of breaking, no matter how firmly they were spoken. Jake was the last one folding chairs when he spotted a figure by the fire pit, nudging the last glowing ember with a long stick like he expected it to confess. Evan. "You ever not sneak up on people?" Jake asked, hauling a folded tarp onto the table. "I didn't sneak. You just don't pay attention to your surroundings," Evan said, without looking up. "Probably why you always stepped on rakes growing up." Jake smirked. "Still better than the time you tripped over an extension cord and blamed the Holy Spirit." "That revival tent had poor lighting," Evan muttered, straightening. Jake came to stand beside him. "Didn't think you were the sit-around-the-circle type." "I'm not," Evan replied, brushing his palms on his jeans. "But I'm a fan of people who are trying, and tonight felt like something worth sticking around for." Jake studied him. There was no bluff in Evan's eyes, no hint of the usual sarcasm, just a quiet sincerity Jake hadn't seen before. "You believe in it? The bridge or you?" Jake exhaled a laugh. "You always got to be difficult?" Evan shrugged. "Hey, I bring balance. You're all reflective and poetic now. Someone's got to keep things grounded." A beat passed, quieter this time. "But yeah," Evan said more seriously, "I believe in what this is becoming. I'm not here because I think wood and bolts are going to save the town. I'm here because I remember who you were before you forgot who you were." Jake blinked. "That's either really deep or wildly insulting." Evan grinned. "Both. You'll think about it later and realize I'm a genius." Jake cracked a smile. "Thanks for showing up." "I always do, even when you don't notice." He started to walk off, then tossed one more line over his shoulder. "Besides, someone's got to keep an eye on you. Can't have the great Jake Weston turning into a Hallmark card. One more dramatic monologue, and I'm faking an injury." Jake chuckled as Evan disappeared into the shadows toward his truck, the echo of boots crunching gravel trailing behind him. The fire had almost died out, but somehow Jake didn't feel the dark pressing in quite so much. Later that night, back at the workshop, Jake opened the journal again. The space felt quieter than usual, like the day's prayers had settled in the rafters. He flipped through the worn pages until something fluttered loose. Tucked between two entries was a slip of paper he hadn't noticed before. It was a quote, written in his father's scratchy script. "Breakthrough doesn't come when you've pushed enough. It comes when you've surrendered enough." Jake sat with that for a long time, longer than he meant to. The sounds of the night moved outside, the low hum of crickets, the wind brushing the trees. But inside, there was stillness. Then he bowed his head and whispered, "Okay, I surrender. Not to defeat, not to fear, but to the one who still speaks beside rivers and builds bridges from hearts that finally let go."